Fight between agents from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms and Branch Davidians at Waco in Texas, a 51-day siege began. It ended with the FBI mounting a full-scale military-style assault. As the world watched on television, the Davidian compound erupted into flames. The FBI claimed that the Branch Davidians killed themselves. An investigation revealed disturbing evidence that contradicts the government's version of what happened at Waco.
FBI agents did not return any fire throughout the entire day.
What we have here is a tank infantry type of an operation. They open up with automatic gunfire.
On the use of military personnel and heavy equipment against U.S. citizens, other questions linger. How much was used and why?
The FBI did some wrong things. They didn't light the fire.
I am very, very troubled by the information I received this week suggesting that pyrotechnic devices may have been used in the early morning hours on April the 19th, 1993 at Waco.
Many people would argue your actions. How do you respond to their families?
It's not because of our actions. Those children are dead because David Koresh had them killed. There's no question about that. He had those fires started. He had 51 days to release those children. He chose those children to die.
I don't know who started the fire or fires. I don't know who fired bullets into these people's bodies. I don't know from what origin the bullets came from. So if we could completely agree that we do not have a definitive answer of the sourcing, then in fact what we have is an open homicide.
Is there anything that we've missed that we should go after in the remaining 2 days?
Yes, sir. I think we've missed some of the questions as to, as I mentioned earlier, why items of evidence have disappeared, why the crime scene was destroyed before it could be evaluated. These areas, especially the evidence disappearing.
I mean, you have, in essence, a crime scene that was so seriously flawed through ignorance or through an air of an elite mentality, or in fact there was a conscious decision made to not collect evidence for any sort of serious examination other than to try and prove that the Davidians had weaponry and firepower enough to kill federal agents. Some of these bodies exhibited characteristics of perhaps being shot. Did anyone fire from any other location?
The information that we've always been given was that there was no federal gunfire on the day of April 19th. Well, in reviewing the photographs and the 302s, the statements in them, I would say there are some questions that need to be answered.
The FBI named the sniper positions Sierra 1, Sierra 2, and Sierra 3. On April the 19th, FBI Special Agent Charles Riley stated in his after-action report that he had heard shots fired that morning from sniper position number 1, the undercover house. The position was occupied by the Blue Sniper team, led by Special Agent Lon Horiuchi. Horiuchi stated that neither he nor his snipers fired their weapons on April the 19th.
The fact that Agent Horiuchi states in his 302 that the snipers at Sierra 1, which was the undercover house, did not fire, and there is a shell casing, expended shell casing there visible on the floor, would also raise a question.
4 expended shell casings were later found at Sierra 1, the location of Agent Horiuchi's Blue Sniper team.
Our desire was to get them out, to use non-lethal means in a systematic manner so that they would come before the bar and face justice. We did not want this to occur. At some point, we had to up the ante. He was continually fortifying. He was demanding and was seeking provocation to get into a shootout with us, which we were refusing to do.
According to the FBI's on-site activity log, at 9:03 a.m., FBI command advised Sierra 2 that an unknown subject could be seen traveling on foot at the back of the building. In this aerial photo taken at approximately 9 a.m., a Davidian appears to be leaving the building and walking towards the back of the compound. The log indicates that Falcon 2, an FBI helicopter, took off to intercept the subject. As it approached Mount Carmel, several flashes were seen coming from the side of the helicopter. Dr. Edward Allard, a former supervising scientist in video and television imagery at the U.S. government's Night Vision Directorate, examined the helicopter footage and concluded that the flashes were gunfire.
When we analyze these flashes, as we have done, in 1/60th of a second time frames, it appears that there's 3 shots coming from the helicopter, but in fact, each one of those 3 shots can be broken down into 1/60th time frames, 60th of a second, and we find, for instance, in the first flash, there's 5 separate shots being fired. And it's indicative of a machine gun that's firing at about 600 rounds per minute.
In this footage showing one of the FBI's helicopters, a pedestal-mounted machine gun can be clearly seen in the doorway.
FBI agents did not return any fire throughout the entire day, in spite of being fired upon numerous times by occupants of the compound.
On the other hand, since this is on a helicopter and people might say that it's reflections from the windshield, it's impossible for these shots that you're seeing with your own eyes to be solar reflections, because if it were so, the helicopter would have to be violently moving back and forth like a mirror in your hands, and this is impossible. So it's in our opinion, it's clearly machine gun fire from the helicopter.
In coming out, the conversation, as I remember it, was, well, if we come out, will we be shot?
According to the autopsy reports, Philip Henry was shot several times in the chest, shoulder, and head. Jimmy Riddle was shot once in the forehead. Neither of them had soot accumulation in their trachea or bronchial tubes or carbon monoxide in their blood, indicating that they died before the fire started.
Later, when I saw the autopsy report and seen that he died of a gunshot wound to the head, it made me wonder if it was in fact the snipers that were in the barn garage that was in the back of the property.
News reports showed events unfolding on the Branch Davidian Ranch in Waco. The FBI's infrared video shows what took place at the rear of the structure.
What a FLIR really does is it takes invisible radiation, which is called infrared radiation, and it converts it into visual radiation, you might say, that we can see with the eye. What we have here is a tank infantry type of an operation. As the tank moves forward, 2 men have dropped out of the escape hatch. They roll over, and as they roll over, they open up with automatic gunfire. We've measured the actual time of the individual flashes, and they occur at a fraction of a second, in some cases a 30th of a second. There is absolutely nothing in nature that can cause thermal flashes to occur in a 30th of a second.
Somebody related or who had prepared a film or analyzed a film, representatives of the department and representatives of the FBI went over it in detail and concluded that there was no basis for suggesting that shots had been fired.
As the tank crushed the roof of the gymnasium, gunfire can be seen streaming into the dining room from positions in the courtyard.
I stopped counting after about 62 individual shots.
Interviewed on NBC's Meet the Press on May the 4th, 1997, FBI Director Louis Freeh stated that no shots were fired by any federal agents outside of the compound, and that allegations raised about gunfire seemed to be based on some inferences from infrared flash patterns and heat patterns. I think the overwhelming evidence clearly shows that no shots were fired.
It's indicative of sunlight reflecting off something and registering on the flare. It could be a thermal pattern. If it were a thermal pattern, there is nothing that persists from that. Right. So therefore, it is more likely to have been reflected light off of something shiny, in which the sunlight now gives an apparent temperature rise.
From the basic physics, it's safe to say that it's impossible for the Waco FLIR to detect any solar reflections of any kind.
On our wish list as investigators was taking a harder look at the FLIR. The congressional staff was never able to find or take advantage of a genuine FLIR expert to watch the FLIR video with us and to understand exactly what we were seeing.
By comparison, this Department of Defense FLIR video taken in Somalia in October of 1993 as troops exit a helicopter shows gunfire similar to the thermal signature on the FLIR videotape at Waco. A former analyst from the U.S. intelligence community, Maurice Cox, tested the FBI's claim applying the principles of solar geometry. For an aircraft flying at an altitude of 2,700 meters, a flash anomaly occurring on the ground would be visible in an area only 30 meters wide. Frame-by-frame measurements of the FLIR videotape showed a repetition of 10 flashes per second, the same rate as a machine gun firing at 600 rounds per minute. According to the sunlight reflections report, in order to duplicate these multiple flashes, the reflective surfaces would have to be exactly the same shape and size and positioned in an array too precise to occur by chance. To record sunlight reflections at 10 flashes per second, the FBI's small aircraft would have had to travel at Mach 1.8, nearly twice the speed of sound. The sun reflection report concluded that the flash signatures on the Waco FLIR video could only have been caused by gunfire. In January 1999, Mr. Cox challenged Director Freeh and Bureau scientists to disprove his findings. They did not respond.
If someone comes to me to understand the data, I need to tell them the uncertainty associated with it. If the government is only telling them, this was not a field of fire, well, the government is refusing to look at this, and anybody with their plain eyes could see, well, something's going on there.
You know, when you think of the fact they're shooting automatic weapons fire into a building with children in it, there's something wrong.
Dr. Allard has stated that this video shows gunfire being directed into Mount Carmel from the outside of Mount Carmel on April 19th. The only people that could have come from would have been federal agents.
Other flashes can be detected on the FLIR tape within an hour of the fire, such as this detonation in the courtyard, which has a thermal signature that is consistent with a hand grenade exploding. More gunfire can be seen near this tank. But if the FBI's claim is true and the hostage rescue team didn't fire at Branch Davidians, then there is another possibility.
According to what we saw written in the Book of Mayhem, we were to undergo a military-style attack. We were to be attacked by tanks and people from the military.
On the use of military personnel and heavy equipment against U.S. citizens, other questions linger. How much was used and why?
There was concern expressed that the FBI had only one hostage rescue team and they were tiring. Do you recall that conversation in that meeting?
I recall, I believe I asked for that meeting, yes.
On April the 14th, just 5 days before the fire, a meeting was held between Attorney General Janet Reno, the FBI command team, and Special Forces commanders Brigadier General Peter J. Schumacher and Colonel Gerald Boykin of Delta Force, The purpose of this meeting was to convince Reno to authorize a final assault at Waco.
Military is trained to find, fix, and destroy the enemy. You don't worry about warning your military enemy of constitutional rights.
What is generally known or known in public as Delta Force is in reality called Combat Applications Group. So anybody who asks about Delta will get told with a straight face by the Army that no such organization exists. What organization does exist is Combat Applications Group, and their stated mission is to perform counterterrorism operations overseas in defense of U.S. interests.
Earlier in an opening I gave this morning with regard to the Posse Comitatus Act, just to refresh my colleague's memory, the Posse Comitatus statute is a criminal statute that states that it's a crime to use any part of the Army or Air Force to enforce the laws of the land unless authorized by Congress or the Constitution.
There is, in my judgment, it is absolutely clear that no law was violated, no action was taken that comes close to violating Posse Comitatus or any other law. General Huffman, do you agree with that?
Congressman, so far as the Army's involvement in this, I would say that is correct.
Yes, right here.
The Army Delta anti-terrorist team or any other military operational asset?
The question is, are we getting any help from the military?
From the Delta team.
The question is, are we getting help from the Delta teams? And we're not.
In mid-March 1993, I attended a senior executive staff meeting at CIA headquarters, and it involved senior agency management along with the liaison officers from the U.S. military, in particular from Delta Group. The briefing centered on Delta's operations in Waco, Texas.
This previously classified military document confirms the presence of Delta Force at Mount Carmel. With approval of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, an observer was deployed to the scene on March the 21st, 1993, accompanied by 3 other operators, also characterized as observers.
One particular soldier was questioned by a member of the hearing and pressed and pressed. He did not want to reveal even the existence of Delta Force, and finally had to admit that they were present.
Originally, I was told that there was just going to be 1 or 2 Delta personnel there as observers, but during the briefing, it was mentioned that there was over 10 Delta operators at Waco, Texas, and they were not there merely as observers, but would be participating in any type of operational or tactical effort against the Branch Davidians.
My understanding is that in some way, the U.S. military, Delta Force, were advising the hostage rescue team from inside the tanks or inside the Brady fighting vehicles, or were present at the sniper posts to provide support or assistance. And those types of activities to me would mean forward deployed. They were not back at a conference room or table giving advice or saying you ought to think about this. They were out there working shoulder to shoulder with the HRT.
Approximately a year after the Waco incident, I was deployed overseas in Europe, and I had the chance to meet some of the Delta operators that I had been on previous assignments. They had told me on several different occasions during my meetings with them in Europe that not only were they forwardly deployed at Waco, Texas, but they were actually involved in a gunfight with the Branch Davidians.
When you see the individuals roll out from the tank and come around the sides and start shooting into the building, what they're doing is they're defending the vehicle. If HRT or Combat Applications Group, whoever was pulling the triggers, expected resistance, expected shots to be fired, then their moves on April 19th made tactical sense. But I did talk to some Combat Applications Group guys, and they did confirm that yes, portions of the B Squadron were there pulling triggers.
There's no doubt in my mind that the flashes on the FLIR tape was fire from semi-automatic or automatic weapon fire being returned into the building. I mean, it's inconsistent to even think otherwise. There were people there on the ground with automatic weapons, and flashes such as that only come from one thing, and it comes from rifle barrels that are firing back into the building.
Their operators had penetrated the buildings on several occasions, planting surveillance devices, listening devices, sensors. And on one occasion, I believe it was April 17th, late 17th, early 18th, Koresh was actually within 6 feet of one of the operators, and they radioed back to the Tactical Operations Center for permission to grab him. Within minutes, the word came back from Justice Department, no, we already have a plan in place. That plan, of course, being what happened on April 19th.
To me, that would be an offensive gesture. When you enter someone's home, that's pretty offensive, and I would personally have a problem with that. I think that it violates everything that I've been taught, that you don't use the military against civilian personnel in this country.
What about other reports that the military Delta Force may have been involved in one way or another? Will you make an inquiry into that as well?
We will pursue any issue that is in question.
I will not let this become a show trial with law enforcement as the defendant. These Waco hearings must not degenerate into a kangaroo court. It is unfair for us today to look at what law enforcement did at Waco in a vacuum. And it is unfair to twist the facts, making law enforcement the villain and David Koresh, the lawbreaker, the victim.
David Koresh, you may not think he was innocent. The mothers and the fathers of the children, you may not think were innocent. But those 17 children that died here were truly innocent.
We had heard during the meeting various scenarios that they were going to use down in Waco, Texas, to try to bring a speedy recovery or a speedy end to what was taking place down there. And at that time, gas was talked about. A couple other situations, non-lethal situations were talked about. And the primary concern around the table was a lot of the Branch Davidians that were inside that building were willing or did not want to end their lives in such a fashion, especially the 17 children that were down there.
Where does God sit? On the throne? Where's that at? Point. Where's God live? Is he going to save you? How come?
Well, people ask why we didn't let the children out. If they saw all that was happening, and they were in there with their children, would they have sent them out to the animals outside that were shooting at them and doing all those terrible things? No.
Federal law enforcement officers obviously did make some tactical errors prior to and during this tragic incident, and I hope this body, somebody, holds them accountable. Please, I'm pleading with you, somebody out there in the federal government still screwed up big time, okay? But they didn't start this fire.
According to the ATF's arson investigation, accelerants were used at all points of origin of the fire.
There is no disagreement between us that this fire was intentionally started inside the compound by the people in there using flammable liquids as accelerants.
I don't remember who it was, but he was pouring this liquid on the floor. And Papa was saying, don't pour it inside, pour it outside.
It was clear to us from listening to those tapes that the government was going to be able to prove that the Davidians, at least some of the Davidians, had a plan, and that some of the Davidians were aware of this plan.
I'm sure that the FBI down there had a lot of fiber optics, audio, and visual equipment installed in the building there. I'm sure they knew exactly what the Branch Davidians' plans were, what their intentions were, if there was an attack against the building, such as a gas attack like that.
But they believed we were going to try to enter the compound, and the way the overhears sounded, like there was one comment that we're going to wait until they come in before we light this.
Why in the world would the FBI make the assault knowing that information. It borderlines on criminal misconduct for the FBI to make that assault when they knew that he was going to respond like that, particularly on the most windy day of the year.
In the last few hours of the siege at Waco, the FBI claimed that it did not use Pyrotechnics CS rounds, munitions capable of starting a fire. However, in this footage made prior to the fire, 2 agents were seen firing projectiles from an M79 grenade launcher into the storm shelter at the north end of the building. Seconds later, white smoke pours from the shelter. According to CS expert Colonel Rex Applegate, any tear gas that creates smoke is considered pyrotechnic.
There's been some unfortunate reporting talking about that if tear gas were utilized, it would deprive the children of oxygen and it perhaps could be fatal. What they were describing is not the type of tear gas that we are using. We're using a non-pyrotechnic type tear gas, which does not deprive them of oxygen, so it is not a lethal type gas.
This is a U.S. military Mark 651 CS projectile recovered in the aftermath of the Mount Carmel fire. It is pyrotechnic and has a burning time of 25 to 30 seconds. It generates a distinctive cloud of white smoke.
I am very, very troubled by the information I received this week suggesting that pyrotechnic devices may have been used in the early morning hours on April the 19th, 1993 at Waco. At this time, all available indications are that the devices were not directed at the main wooden compound, were discharged several hours before the fire started, and were not the cause of the fire.
In the autumn of 1998, unprecedented access to the Waco evidence lockers was granted. The pyrotechnic projectiles identified in the crime scene photos were missing from the evidence boxes. However, 2 additional 40mm munitions were found. These devices are identified by the manufacturer's literature as pyrotechnic rounds. They were found in the rubble behind the compound. These munitions were examined, and the preliminary results indicated these devices may have passed through the wooden structure.
You guys have had the evidence for 6 years, and then the Texas Rangers and documentary filmmaker come in. I don't know how long he's been working on the film, but probably a few months maybe.
Testified that there were 2 explosions. This footage shows the detonation of a high explosive device on the bunker, which appears to ignite gas from a ruptured propane tank. After the completion of the FBI and Texas Rangers investigation, the bunker was bulldozed into rubble. 6 years later, in 1999, permission was granted to test the residue from the blast. Strangely, however, that portion of the bunker was not found after a thorough search of the rubble.
That's a child's. I mean, that's just a little bit.
Like a 1-year-old.
Yeah, see this? Boom.
Yeah.
You know?
According to the FBI and ATF investigation, the Branch Davidians did possess some low-order explosives like gunpowder. But this would not be capable of penetrating 15 to 20 centimeters of steel-reinforced concrete like a high-order explosive such as TNT.
The blast hole at the top of the roof, you can plainly see the rebar is bent in.
The damage to the stainless steel refrigerator, which appears to have been under the blast hole, is consistent with a shape charge, and the blast being directed downward into the room in this enclosed concrete room would very likely cause some seam rupture and create a huge overpressure inside the room that would pretty much kill everybody in there.
Having examined still photographs and videotapes of the bunker, it was apparent to me that this was caused by a shape charge. But what bothers me is who would have the audacity to use such a charge.
Rather than risk your own people going in there and trying to shoot it out with them, That's a standard tactic in city fighting, in military operations that built up terrain, to use explosives in this manner to kill people in the targeted room that you're going to attack.
The military's advice to the FBI was that it should focus on the leadership and capture or kill David Koresh.
It was to our benefit that we were able to prevent him from carrying out the second part of his prophecy, and that is that he intended to kill as many members of law enforcement as he could before his members were killed. It was to our benefit, and we're most fortunate that none of our people were injured.
Well, it's very obvious that the effort that was demonstrated there assured that there would be no survivors in the church records vault.
Was the Attorney General pressured by the White House to end the siege? What were the roles of Webster Hubbell and Vince Foster? Who actually made the decision to use CS gas with 22 children inside the Davidian compound? After 2 years, why is there still no clear answer?
The Rangers had difficulties working with the FBI. They had a major responsibility. We had our responsibility, and they seemed not to go hand in hand. And as I recall, I testified before Congress about having a name in the White House I could have called to solicit the support of the federal authorities in our objective. And it turned out to be Vince Foster.
Mr. Hubbell, do you recall a meeting on or about the 14th or 15th of April that you attended with Vince Foster, with Mr. Nussbaum, and I guess some others, in which was really a turning point? Did you or others at that meeting recommend, or was there any discussion about the use of military force or equipment?
There was not any discussion about use of military force. There was discussion of having the military evaluate the FBI's plan.
The briefings by Brigadier General Schumacher and Colonel Boykin of Delta Force gave Attorney General Janet Reno the assurances she needed to approve the FBI assault plan. Presidential counsel Vince Foster was the White House's point of contact for the Waco affair. 90 days later, Foster committed suicide.
He had a lot of things on his plate at the time, the firing the travel office being one, but nobody was killed in that one. What I think was really on his mind was Waco. To this day, I don't understand what he meant by the FBI lied to me.
Mrs. Foster said that her husband was depressed about a number of matters, and she ranked the Waco tragedy very high, as any of us would who are responsible for such an activity that resulted in such a tragedy.
In this FBI report, Mrs. Foster indicated that her husband was troubled by the deaths of the children at Waco and believed that everything was his fault.
When you are troubled by something and you feel responsible for something, you can only feel responsible for it if you could have done something about it. Perhaps Mr. Foster felt that he could have done something about Waco, whether he tried to intervene, whether he was overruled.
We believed that because the military was present at Waco in some capacity, that the president may have made a decision to allow that to happen, following some sort of a legal protocol where he says this is of such a serious nature they need to be involved. And we asked for those documents and asked to see National Security Council documents. And were not provided with any information that enabled us to reach a conclusion.
It's a serious allegation that the president interfered with, changed, moved up the decision. And we can't just bandy these things around unless we have some real evidence.
If Combat Applications Group was on the ground that day, actually pulling triggers, the origin of that operation would have come directly from the White House. It would have come from the president, because Combat Applications Group is, for all intents and purposes, the president's private army.
It was discussed at the meeting that the senior levels of the Clinton administration had authorized Delta to be deployed to Waco, Texas, and not just 2 or 3 people deployed there, but enough people there to get the job done.
As we come to an end, all of us are looking for anything that happened in these hearings after 8 days and nights to indicate not that General Reno had something to do with this, but now the president. Well, after we've exhausted that bit, the only one left that I can think of is the butler. Maybe the butler did it. I am surprised you hadn't tried to subpoena the butler by now.
It's the world's largest land mammal with a world...
Waco. The implications reach the highest levels.
Our disappointment could not have been greater as professionals and as humans who care about the plight of others when the investigation was terminated by Congress.
As I count up the deaths here, 86, and then if you want to make the leap that Oklahoma City has some connection because it was done on the anniversary of Waco, that's another 160, give or take. So you're talking 246 lives, and for this Congress to try to oversee what in the hell happened and how did it happen, it just seems to be talking about the butler did it, a little capricious, a little frivolous, and that's just my opinion. I yield my time to Mr. McCullum.
It's a struggle we've had. I was Attorney General when the Freedom of Information Act was passed, and the government hated the Freedom of Information Act. They hated me for pressing for it because they don't want to be questioned about what they do. They don't want to have to explain what they do. And yet, if you want to be a free society, if you want to have justice, if you want to avoid a police state, you better know what your government does. You better insist upon a right to know what your government does.
If we choose to learn from our mistakes, it is from admitting our errors that we come closer to understanding how we might prevent tragedies like these from happening in the future. Those who cannot admit their mistakes, well, all we can do is offer our prayers. Our government is an imperfect one, compromised of imperfect people. It can only be as good as we choose to make it. We have come too far to quit or to coast. We must continue to make it better. For we must not allow ourselves to become bitter, only better. Perhaps the greatest lesson to be learned is often the most difficult to remember until it's too late. And that is, life is very precious. It happens in moments, not seconds, not minutes, not hours, but in moments. And let us forgive, but let us never forget as we move from ashes to understanding.
We're in the Power Zone next here on Discovery with Great Battles. Tonight we're going back to 1066 to examine the technology and weaponry available in the Battle of Hastings.